There's a real big common misconception that you need to get to 1 million EBITDA to sell to private equity or in a private equity backed deal, and that's not true. But I think that a lot of founders, and again, LinkedIn I do think is to blame for this, feel that if they're not doing that, they are failing in some way. And I actually have never thought that that's true.
How does the founder figure what they really want from their business?
The idea that you can spend time working on the business is often forgotten, I think, in the melee of running a small agency. And I think that that's one of the biggest mistakes that founders make.
How did selling your agency change your view on business, ownerships, also your personal ambition?
That is a good question. I think I've seen a number of deals fall apart before they've even got going because the senior leadership team just hasn't been introduced in the right way, or they're not the right people. So I really feel like the smaller agency is going to be having a moment in the next 2 years for sure.
If you could fix one thing in the agency world overnight, what would it be?
With AI, I think there's a lot of sort of almost like headless chickens running around thinking, oh my God, I need to, get my agency on board with AI. I don't want to get left behind here, but how do we use it? And the truth is, no one on LinkedIn.
What does good look like when it comes to, yes, I'm ready, my business is ready to be sold? Today, we are joined by Jonathan Smith, Managing Partner at Draft Partners, which is an M&A and growth advisory for creative and technology-focused agencies. And he's also former founder of digital product agency Catch, which he founded and bootstrapped to multi-million-pound revenue and consistent 25+ EBITDA, opened offices in Madrid, New York, and then sold it to a private equity-backed deal. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Romans, thanks for having me.
Was it more or less accurate?
Yeah, no, that's good. It was a good start. I wouldn't change too much about that. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and see where it goes.
Great. So I think a good starting point would be obviously I did a very concise intro, but would be interesting to hear about obviously Catch, your version of your introduction, where you started it and what what happened with the deal, and then where you're at the minute.
Yeah, sure. Like an origin story, I guess, from the agency. So yeah, I get asked sort of like, why did you, start it? What was the desire or the original thought? And I think that it was the desire for me to start the agency was really to create, to be honest, a workplace that I would want to go and work at every day, if that made sense. That somewhere that I would feel enthused and engaged to get up in the morning and think, yes, I'm going to work with these people on these challenges, delivering these kind of outcomes for clients. And I'd worked at a bunch of different agencies in the early noughties, and these were kind of digital agencies, but it was like the Wild West. There was so much opportunity. None of us really particularly, there was no proven roadmap for kind of digital, as it was called back then. Brands were just beginning to get on board, having websites. Social media was in its very early days, infancy, if at all. So 2007 when I started still felt like the Wild West, of all things digital, and I sort of wanted to do that for myself, creating a space and an agency that was fun. I think I'd had various mixed experiences at the agencies I'd worked at. I think the people were great. Sometimes the structure and the managerial aspects weren't so great. So I was thinking, if I could take these great colleagues I've got and create something where we're all running it together, that would be really engaging and fun. So actually it was fun, really. That was my first kind of the driving desire to create a fun and engaging place to work.
Has it still been the sort of core philosophy or idea for you, going forward? Like when you start scaling and growing, how did you, I guess the question is, how did you manage to maintain that core idea of having fun once you start actually having a proper business?
Yeah, I think that definitely become challenging for sure. I think, one of the biggest challenges, in the early days was the grind, really, the kind of long hours and weekends as a solo founder. The buck stops with you. Then there's the growing pressure and expectation as you grow, and you have your first staff member, your second, your third. You feel very responsible for them, how do you balance keeping it fun whilst having these increased expectations and pressure on you? I think as you get more clients, more projects, more staff, more costs, your overheads go up. Sure, it can be difficult to balance the kind of fun aspect, but I think I always found myself trying to come back to that. And mainly because I think what is an agency if not a group of humans, individuals, and the best way to make sure that you're maintaining a good relationship with them and to keep them, hopefully long term and provide them with an engaging place to work is to keep it fun for them. I think burnout is real and burnout isn't fun. And I think that's it's a real challenge for any agency owner to manage that for sure. But I always think I kind of felt like it was important to always bring it back to, are we still having fun? Is this an engaging place to work? Do my team want to get up in the morning? Do they look forward to coming into work? And I think it's a very possibly simplistic overview, but I think that sometimes it's best to keep it simple.
Was there some sort of a mechanism, like a culture strategy, or the way you planned meetings, or the way you planned your work to actually make it practical for the team, like to have that fun? How did you translate that into like day to day, or was it more of like an intuitive feeling? Hey, let's just approach the work that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I do think that, if we're talking at the beginning of this origin story was back in 2007, 2008, when I started the agency. And I think, hands up, it's a very different cult. Society is generally very different now. I think, remote teams, etc. We were working, 5 days a week in the office, the occasional weekend for me, of course. But, we had a dedicated office in the middle of Soho, and we really kind of forged our friendships in the pub, for want of a more kind of professional way of looking at things. And that, times have changed, and that's not so much now, especially the kind of the younger generation. That's not necessarily the best way to forge relationships. But I think that we were very lucky that it was just a time and a place where that was really common. And so we had lots of fun, and we'd make sure that the company card was always sort of behind the bar. We'd buy lunches. We'd go out, most evenings in Soho. Everyone was in their 20s sort of having fun. So I think that obviously as we grew, that became harder to maintain that. You can go to the bar with 4 people, then it's easy to get a pint. But when you're going to the bar with 45 people, it's a little bit different. You have to book ahead and etc. It doesn't seem so spontaneous. So I always loved that spontaneity in the early days. I think that's what drove me in part as well. But I think in terms of how we arrange the day-to-day, autonomy I think is really important. I think trusting in people, back yourself to hire. You've hired that person for a reason, and hopefully that reason is your gut instinct is right about them. Just in terms of their ability to deliver, their sort of commitment to the job and their skills and communication and everything. So allow them to get on with it and trust that they're going to do the best possible job. It doesn't always work out sometimes, but I think that autonomy helps people feel more valued, and I think that's really important.
On the other side of the spectrum, did you, and I'm sure it did, every founder experienced or experiences a level of challenge and struggle and burnout, as you mentioned. What were your toughest, perhaps internal obstacles that you had to overcome as a founder in the early days, but also, when you were going through the phase of scale and professionalizing or operationalizing the business?
Good question. I think that my mindset was always that if a job was worth doing, it was worth doing properly. And I admit I'm probably still a bit of a perfectionist, and that's a problem because that belief is the opposite of that kind of agile delivery methodology, right? The idea of that perfection is the enemy of progress. And I would stress over making something perfect and overthinking it and possibly, putting too many hours into trying to make something good, when actually it would be better to, as the agile methodology sort of promotes, is to kind of test and learn, to iterate, to release something, get feedback, etc. Agencies can be really scrappy, disorganized things, and I was quite sort of liked everything to be neat and organized. So I think I struggled with that. Probably that was the thing that I had to focus on, trying to become more flexible and understand that it just wasn't practical to make every client relationship perfect, every relationship between me and a staff member perfect, every day perfect at the office. That was just that was something I think I definitely struggled with. I think, pitch proposals, staff reviews, I really wanted to have the best framework, and I'd spend an inordinate amount of time trying to make sure that everything was kind of aligned and ducks in a row. But actually, as you scale, the scrappiness can increase and you just have to deal with that. So my tendency to overthink and spend sort of more time on everything than I should, I sort of had to unlearn that, I suppose.
Mm.
So
How'd you do that? Was it a more like conscious intentional process? Did you commit to a certain discipline or?
yeah, and a good question. I'm not sure actually. I've had to learn it really on the job, as all kind of first time founders do. I think you possibly, as when you found a company, you have certain ideals about how it could potentially go down this path, for example, but then you find yourself going down a completely different path and just having to kind of deal with it and adapt. But I think if you surround yourself with smart people and you're flexible and you have an open mindset and a really positive culture, I think that there's very few bumps in the road that you can't navigate, right? So I think that I just sort of learned to be more flexible. And I think I probably learned from people as well. I always admired, especially the creatives that we had that would turn up, you know, seemingly 5 minutes before a pitch without really thinking about it necessarily, and just really nail the presentation to the client. And I'd be, sweating the night before, practicing what I was going to say and writing 20 slides when we only had time for 2 slides. So I definitely was inspired by certain people to relax, I think, a bit more into the job.
That's why it's so important to keep that idea in mind, which is it's essentially a people and process business. And I feel, based on our experience, like a lot of agencies tend to forget that it's people and process business, and I think there is a tendency to optimize for growth, because partially because of social media and exposure to social media and see all the news, not just from agencies but from Silicon Valley world, from tech world. Growth is and scale is all that matters. And over the past 2 3 years or so, at least in my view, there's a bigger tendency to talk about profitability and how to like build a more sort of lifestyle business, or business that has more predictability, more control, that has more profit. And it's actually what you and me spoke about before we started recording this, that you've consciously decided to go the sort of high profit or higher profit path rather than scaling big to 8+ figures and so on and so forth. So I'm curious, how did you make that decision? What was going on through your head? Because we constantly speak to founders who are a little bit indecisive. Like they kind of they're split in between two options, and they don't know how which option they want to identify themselves with. So I'm curious, how did you go through that process of deciding, hey, I know that is the thing that I want?
Yeah, good question. I think to your point about, social media, I think we have got to a place, maybe LinkedIn is to blame for this. I think, we've seemed to become really inspired as founders in the UK with American hustle culture, like, sort of scale and growth over everything. And, if you're successful, it means you scale to, 80, 100, 150, 200 employees and are turning over, millions of dollars. And I think that is sort of come out of nowhere, really. And I think that LinkedIn is sort of to blame for that. But I personally have always enjoyed the feeling that I can make more of an impact, and the teams I work with can make more of an impact, being a tighter unit. So I think that that's something that has always sort of excited me. Like, I get much more excited thinking about I would prefer to run a $3 million agency at 25% margins than a 10 million revenue business with 5% margins, unquantifiable stress on the founder, 80 staff, churn, never-ending treadmill of new business, etc. And that's, I sort of look at those two things and I think who would take that path of growth. But I think that a lot of founders, and again LinkedIn I do think is to blame for this, feel that if they're not doing that, they are failing in some way. And I actually have never thought that that's true. And I think certainly my own journey at Catch, I was very sort of clear with everyone that I never had any desire to run an agency that was going to be sort of 80 to 150 people. You know, what I was much more sort of excited about was the idea of having a sort of tightly knit, focused team delivering one or two things well. We did more than that, but that was the ideal, was to do one or two things that kind of niche down, and which is tough, and we can talk about that in a minute. And that I just felt like that to optimize delivery, optimize, you know, how we communicate, how we, you know, sort of nail down our proposition and positioning. And I always felt like I personally got more reward out of tweaking all of those levers that you can pull and optimizing something that may only be making, let's say, $5.5 million a year revenue wise, but actually with a near 30% net margin, we were, you know, significantly more profitable than agencies that were at least twice our size. I'm not saying it was half of the stress, because obviously running an agency is stressful, but I really liked the idea of having this agile but highly focused business, like a speedboat. We always used to talk about we were the nimble speedboat up against these big oil tankers, and we could sort of outmaneuver them when we needed to.
And you said that niching down was a big part of it, and you said that it was quite difficult. What was difficult about niching down?
Deciding where your niche is, I think, is a challenge, of course. I think that the agents, from my own experience and also the agencies that I work with now, I think the ones that are most successful are the ones that probably have been generalists at some point, but they have worked out where the value lies in their offering and the outputs they create for clients, how they fix their client challenges. And there's a lot of natural gravitation then to sort of look in that particular area and start to build out a proposition and positioning that really speaks to the ICP that is that part of the business. So to be that, I don't know, you know, the actual individual service line that you're offering. And then the other services sort of tend to fall away. And then before you know it, you're actually working specifically in this area. I think that, you know, a lot of the, I suppose, gurus at the moment are saying, right, yeah, choose a niche, stick with it, go for it. But I think if you don't have demonstrable skills and experience delivering in that area going over a period of years, I would personally find that very tough to do. And I think there's a lot of misadvice out there about it's as easy as like picking a niche and just mining that niche. I think it's something that you can't do overnight. And we certainly fell into it over many years, but eventually things really clicked into place certainly from a profitability perspective, but just kind of unlocking that next level of client spend when we were seen as the go-to agency for the thing that we specialized in. And I think ultimately that's what I try to get to with any agency that I advise on their sort of exit journey, is if you can become the go-to for that thing, that service that you're delivering, then that's a really compelling proposition, and you know, arguably the value of the business increases significantly.
I think what most quote-unquote gurus do not talk about is customer development, or what they refer to customer development in the tech world, which is building your product with the customer, or developing your customer as you're building your product, because you don't know whether the particular customer or ICP is going to be your ultimate ICP, and you don't know whether this niche or offer is going to be your ultimate offer.
Yeah.
Therefore, I think that needs to be that mindset that, hey, it's not perfect. Like I don't need to have all the answers about my niche and the offer today, but it is going to be a process, and which may take months and years until I arrive to the point where I feel very confident about my ICP and the market that I'm serving. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, I think certainly from my own experience through Catch, I mean, our ICP was large-scale international businesses that had marketing teams in different countries where English wasn't their native language, but English was the global marketing team's language. Those teams would need to distribute global content out to the individual markets. Those markets would need to translate that content and put it online. So we became known as the go-to agency for these large-scale content managed website platforms with translation workflow. Now that's pretty niche, but once we mined that niche, we just unlocked that next level of big international clients like Sharp Electronics. We had some fantastic clients like the World Wildlife Fund, global businesses basically that came to us for our expertise in these big complex CMSs, for example. And our first client, where we built effectively the product we became known for, was this big international cosmetics brand that was very well known. And we were really, building it for them around their expectations. They were owned by Coty, a big cosmetics kind of owner globally. And then lots of the other brands within the Coty stable came to us and said, "Oh, can you deliver us the same system that you've delivered for Rimmel," the brand was at the time. So each time we delivered it for each of those customers, our workflows got a little bit better and the SEO was more optimized. And before we knew it, we sort of had got all of these skills and experiences around this one particular product we were building that was then easily customizable for a whole range of international businesses. So we really built that in partnership with that first client, really understanding how those marketing teams wanted to take that English language content and translate it locally. Spent, hours talking to these people at all kinds of funny times on phone calls over the world, all over the world. And that really helped us learn those requirements that then ultimately that's where we niched into. And that wasn't overnight. That probably was over a period of maybe 4 years, particularly, really sort of honing down on it in the last kind of 2.5 years or so. And I think that's something that, we didn't just pick that, oh, let's build these like multi-language workflows of this, big complicated CMSs overnight. That we sort of had experience doing that for a number of years before I think we would call ourselves experts in it. If you know Malcolm Gladwell's, the author, his idea that you have to spend X amount of thousands of hours before you can call yourself an expert in something, I definitely buy into that, which is completely the opposite these days of the LinkedIn gurus. So anyone can be an expert in after posting 3 things, 3 posts on LinkedIn, you're an expert.
I don't think people have that much patience nowadays.
No, exactly. That's sad. And certainly, ChatGPT and AI is just expediting humanity's ability to actually concentrate on one thing and have any sort of deep, meaningful relationship with knowledge. I think that's really worrying.
I just saw a meme, I think yesterday, somewhere on social, of a person sitting in front of a laptop, like a founder, and there's a text on top of it, ChatGPT, give me a strategy to build $1 billion business. Please do not make any mistakes. And I think that's the current atmosphere in sort of LinkedIn Bro type of space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so many people are looking at it as a shortcut to success. And I think, there's a whole conversation to be had here about how absolutely you can leverage AI. The opportunity out there has never been better for that. My concerns around it are that we're going to, the next generation, not necessarily our generation, but are going to have sort of very shallow knowledge and not be real sort of deep expertise won't necessarily exist. And it'd be really interesting just to see how society / professional life changes because of that. I think now if you have the world of information at your fingertips, that almost levels the playing field. So I think that we're about to come into this period of time where I think kind of human capital is even more valuable than it's ever been before. Smart humans. I don't buy into the fact that AI is going to devalue the human aspect. I think it will massively increase the value. You will just have less humans in each agency running a team of agentic AI bots. And I'm actually quite excited about that. But I'm not excited about the, say my son's generation. Why put the effort in at school if ChatGPT can write your homework? I think that's going to be tough to navigate, I think, for everyone.
Now, talking about AI, what have you seen or what you're currently seeing in the agency space, given that you're advising and you're heavily involved in M&A? What trends do you see where the focus is that comes from agency leaders when it comes to AI? What kind of questions do they ask?
How do I harness it? How do I not get left behind? How can I increase my my bottom line? How can I increase my margin? How can I deliver work quicker, maintaining high quality using AI? What is fascinating about where we're at the moment? I mentioned when we first started talking today about kind of the Wild West, of the internet back in the early noughties when I had graduated and started working. I sort of feel like we're going through that Wild West period again with AI. I think there's a lot of sort of almost like headless chickens running around thinking, oh my God, I need to, get my agency on board with AI. I don't want to get left behind, but how do we use it? And the truth is, no one on LinkedIn has got the playbook for this. It's still new. 2 years ago, the average agency owner wasn't concerned about AI. They hadn't used ChatGPT. They didn't know what Claude was, etc. Certainly there was, the idea of actually creating entire commercials and movies in, VO, for example, that just didn't exist as a product back then, not publicly anyway. So I think it sort of feels to me like we've got this really chaotic, kind of angst-inducing time that is also exciting and full of opportunities. But nobody has the answer right now. I think that's really important for agency founders to understand. I think from a trend perspective, and maybe this is just more my own personal view than an actual trend that I can point you to a paper and you can read and it justifies what I'm saying, but small but mighty. I think that, what does that mean? I suppose like the easy answer would be to say, well, AI, you can now do the work of 100 people with just 5 with AI. But I think that the trend really for small but mighty agencies has been on the increase kind of since COVID, really. I think since the idea of remote teams becoming just as valuable and able to charge just as much as, the AKQAs of the world, the big networked agencies, I think that has really made a slow shift towards the idea that you can basically have a smaller team anywhere rather than having to have a selection of people in, a city like London or Paris or New York or wherever that is. And I feel that off the back of that as well, there's the niche specialisms that we talked about. Obviously, if you're a specialist in one particular area, you're probably more likely not to need a sort of huge workforce to deliver within that niche. And now on top of that, we have AI expediting that niching down and the idea that you can actually deliver more with less. So I feel that, it's funny, for the same reasons, I'm more excited about a $3 million business, with higher margins than I am about a $10 million business with lower margins. I feel that is the future. I think if you also look at what buyers look for from a value perspective, it is that niche specialism. So I really feel like the smaller agency is going to be having a moment in the next 2 years for sure. I think the big networked agencies are really going to suffer, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for smaller focused businesses that have really integrated AI into their workflow and have very smart, talented humans running those AI to do the menial tasks that then frees them up to do the high value strategic consultative work. That to me is the future of an agency, and that's smaller rather than bigger. I think scale at any cost, I think, is an outdated sort of pre-2021 view. I think smaller mighty is the new scale.
What kind of mindset do you think? Given the fact that you started an agency when there was the Wild West version 1, and now we've got Wild West version 2, what sort of mindset did you use then to navigate it? And do you think you can, we can use the same mindset, apply the same mindset to nowadays?
Yeah, I think having, I suppose, the ability you need to go into it, open-minded. I think one of the bigger challenges now than potentially back in, when I started the agency, is the pace of technological change is phenomenal. Everyone was, 3 weeks ago was going wild about VO being released for, AI video. And then ByteDance came along 3 days later, whatever, and released their model, which is now outperforming VO. And you think, well, that's just happened in the space of less than a week. That's tough to hold on to, keep on top of. So I think that one thing that I've seen that I've thought is a smart move is some of the larger network agencies are building AI councils, and I feel that some of that has filtered down to some of the smaller end clients that I work with, of agencies of only sort of 20 people or so. And I think that's a really smart move. I think that it is the right thing to do, to have a dedicated resource of expertise. Whoever calls themselves an expert in AI obviously is that's a challenging job title right now, because there's so much movement and change on an hourly basis. But I think if you can invest that time, I think that will pay dividends longer term, just in terms of being able to have that AI council perhaps meets once a month, that understands delivery, understands FinOps, understands all the different aspects of the business, and looks at how can we integrate AI in each of these areas within the business, call it workflow, whatever you want to, agentic AI, or otherwise. And I feel that don't silo it. Don't just have, here's our AI expert over here and he's working on the tech side of the business. It's usually something to do with development, right? It tends to naturally fall into a developer type area. I think that if you break down those silos and just have that AI council that works across the business, spotting opportunity for where AI can generally make a difference, I think that's really valuable. That's already happening in some of the big WPP agencies, but I think it's easily transferable to the smaller ones as well.
Is it like essentially a big meeting, like where you perform some sort of a audit diagnostics of what opportunities?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it like that. I've seen it as a show and tell, on a kind of a Friday show and tell at agencies as well, big and small. But I think the important thing is that it's not just pure discovery, it's actual practical application of how you can take what used to be quite a laborious, that you could argue is a menial task for a team of people to do, be that a client onboarding or even QA, when you're coming to QA a product. What tools and services are out there that exist that we can relatively simply plug in, probably for quite a small monthly SaaS cost, that will transform how quickly we can do that part of the business. I think we can deliver that outcome, etc. And I think there's a lot of, we don't want to be accused of sort of like navel gazing and just kind of showing off the latest AI for the sake of it. I think that the implementation is really important, and it's, that's, unless you're on it all the time, it's hard to know what's out there that you can practically apply to improve your workflow, right? Improve your output.
Let's talk about M&A and specifically the sale of your agency business. How did selling your agency change your view on business ownership and perhaps also your personal ambition?
That is a good question. I think when I started the business, I always had an idea that at some point I would want to sell it. I mean, that was very much with me all the way from the very start. I wanted to create somewhere that would be fun to work, build it up to be valuable, and then exit at some point. And, not all founders see in that way. Some want to build a lifestyle business, and that's, totally fine. I actually think the majority of founders don't really spend any time thinking that far into the future when they're just a couple of years into their business. But it had been such a personal and professional ambition for so long for me to kind of build something that was valuable enough to have somebody, desire to build it, that, when I sold, it felt like the end of a really long process. Anyone that's been involved in any kind of business, sale, agency or otherwise, knows it's not really something that happens overnight. It's quite a long and quite arduous journey, not just in the value creation leading up to when you start to speak to buyers, but actually just, physically going through the process of the chemistry meetings, the kind of the flirtation phase, as I call it, and then into due diligence, etc., negotiation, all that. I guess when it comes to the end, I don't know what I was sort of expecting to feel, but I didn't really feel anything, if I'm honest. You sort of close the laptop and after you've signed the contract, and you think, well, still got to go to work tomorrow morning, because actually what I think any exited founder will tell you, that nothing really changes, not immediately anyway. You're realistically tied into some sort of lock-in period, an earn-out of such. And ultimately the buyer has bought you because they have liked the value you have created through the outputs you are delivering, the challenges that you're overcoming for your clients, etc. So they don't necessarily, usually 99 times out of 100, don't want you to change. So actually your challenge is to continue as you are. So I think immediately there was no big sort of epiphany. It's like I said, a sale doesn't creep up on you. It's quite a long, drawn out process. But, I think then after I'd completed my sort of, time through my earnout and left, I feel that it's definitely, I look at life as kind of chapters, and now I'm in this sort of new chapter, and that's a very sort of wonderful, freeing feeling, which is great. But I'm still so much involved in the agency world. I speak to so many founders every week. It's, one of my sort of, I really enjoy being able to stay connected and help people with just the experience that I've had on my own journey. So I kind of sit somewhere now on both sides of the fence almost. I've been the founder, but now I have, a huge amount of kind of connections and have grown my network with buyers as well. And I sort of sit in between. I work predominantly sell side, but, occasionally I'm also working buy side as well. And that's a kind of a nice place to be. I very much feel like I still have my oar in, very much on my toe in the water of the agency world for sure. But yes, it's definitely, it does feel like a new chapter.
What do you think agency founders, owners, leadership teams misunderstand the most about M&A or exit?
I think that there's a real big common misconception that you need to get to 1 million EBITDA to sell to private equity or in a private equity backed deal. And that's not true by any means. I think, I'm not sure, that's probably again come from sort of LinkedIn hustle culture. But I think that there really is something to be said for the value is really in where you're going. So yes, we'll look at your trailing 12 months numbers, etc. But so much of your exit strategy and the planning and the value creation is where you're going. And ultimately, a buyer is looking to place quite a big bet on the fact that you are going to be even more successful than you have been in the trailing 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, however long back we're going to look at the accounts for. And I think that that's where the effort needs to go into. It's the creation of, proposition positioning, get the senior leadership team in place, don't over rely on the founders. All of these great nuggets that everybody should, I hope, know from just, reading various different posts on LinkedIn from advisors like myself these days. I think that there's so much information out there. I think that we're in this sort of great time of really being able to get quite far on your own in terms of that value creation. I think that certainly where, I can come in is help defining that exit strategy, and then with the actual, when the time is right, the introductions to the buyers. I think that's the kind of niche, unique position that I feel like I sit in, which is slightly different to, a regular growth advisor. I'm much more on the let's meet with this buyer end of the spectrum. But I think that the idea that you can spend time working on the business is often forgotten, I think, in the melee of running a small agency. And I think that that's one of the biggest mistakes that founders make. I took probably the best part of 3 and a bit years, possibly, I think, before the actual sale closed, maybe even 4 years, and removed myself from client work completely to just focus on those levers that I talked about earlier. So I think that if more founders were able to shape their team to free themselves up to work on the business instead of in the business, I think that they would see significant kind of improvement on that growth journey and be able to exit potentially sooner for a bigger valuation than if they were just to continue being the sales guy and being the head of client services and being, all of those things that we are all guilty of falling into, because it's just quicker if we do them, if that makes sense.
What do you, yeah, absolutely. What do you advise? What do you tell them? What do you tell those founders who potentially want to exit and they're entertaining the idea of selling their agency, but they're still tied up with operations and delivery, and they're not fully in delivery and operations, but they spend significant amount of time in the business. Is that some sort of a plan for them, or how do you advise them to aim for, or perhaps what would that place be like? What does good look like when it comes to, yes, I'm ready I'm ready. My business is ready to be sold.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is a good place? What does good look like that shows when you're ready to sell the business? And I think that is absolutely understanding your ICP. You know, having a having your proposition and position that is shaped around overcoming the challenge that that ICP, that individual has, and that you have made a name for yourself as the go-to agency to do that. And that, that's tough. There's a lot of competition out there. I think that's number one for me, outside of the obvious. Founder is a roadblock for everyone. Founder is the blocker.
And do you think the reason for that is because, like, for example, strategic buyers, other agencies would be interested in acquiring that kind of ICP that this agency is serving? That's the reason.
No, I think no. It's for skills. It's yes. There are strategics and sometimes private equity that might look to acquire for a particular client or type of client. But for me, certainly in anything that I've been involved in, it's far likely more to be the actual output of the agency, the skills. But I'm talking about when I'm talking about the defined proposition exactly. I'm talking about niching. I'm talking about specialism, and that ultimately, fast forwarding to what's a buyer looking for, is to we're talking about how do you know when you're ready, and I'm now talking about what a buyer is looking for. Is the value is the specialism. There has been very few conversations, if any, that I've had in the last 2 years or so of a buyer looking to acquire a digital marketing agency that does a bit of everything. I mean, that is just not where the value lies. That's why I'm also, sort of saying earlier that the small and mighty era is upon us. I think that's really where the value lies. And I think if you can have a small but mighty team using AI in a smart way, that's really where the value can increase. And I think that it will be those agencies that are able to deliver on both those fronts that will be the ones that are in the best place to sell. So proposition, positioning, founder not being a roadblock, team, really important. Senior leadership team, a real senior leadership team, not just the head of something because they've been at the agency for the longest. I think that all buyers want to see, they're really, a lot of them are buying into the founders sticking around for 2 years. Everyone, buyers are smart. They know that it's highly unlikely that someone is going to stay past their earn out, even if you're nodding in all the right places in the flirtatious stage when you're talking about, what synergies could there be and how could the post-merger integration go and all that sort of conversation. I think that everyone is having one eye on very focused these days actually on that senior leadership team, because at some point one of those is quite likely to step up to run the agency after you leave. And I think I've seen a number of deals fall apart before they've even got going because the senior leadership team just hasn't been introduced in the right way, or they're not the right people. They don't have the requisite skills and experience. I think that investing in a senior leadership team that really supports you in the daily running of the business so you can then work on the business, I think is definitely the best investment you can make. If that, you can't always promote someone that's in the business. You might have grown up, relatively quickly and there's just not the skills and experience within the team. I always hired to be the dumbest guy in the room. I know that's a really cheesy phrase to say, but I, was always very keen to bring people on board that were older than me, that had more experience than me. I started the agency when I was 26, 27. So I'd only been working for 5 or 6 years. So
how do you find these people? Did you poach them from other agencies, or what was your strategy behind hiring?
poached them from other agencies. Sometimes, yes, that did happen a few times. No, I think. Well, actually, do you know what? LinkedIn was becoming a thing, wasn't it? In kind of the teens to 2010 and beyond. And I suppose we kind of got a reputation by that point, and we had a good reputation. So people got in touch. It was still early days of consultants as well. There wasn't consultants like we have now. You tended to have full-time jobs, and you would leave your full-time job to go and work at another full-time job. And freelancing was still very much a small part of our spend instead of a big part as it was towards the end. But yeah, I think that I found them through really my own network, mainly meeting other people that would recommend, oh, you should speak to Romans or you should speak to this person. I think definitely invest in like a FinOps consultant, for like a fractional CFO was a real game changer for Catch for sure. I think also at various different points I brought in external, I suppose you call him a brand consultant, who really helped us run this process of kind of proposition and positioning. And that was a really wonderful time actually, because I was very keen to have the whole agency involved in that, which is quite difficult to get everybody in the same room. But we had a lot of different sessions, so everyone felt really bought in to that. And I think going back to your question about, how do you know when you're ready? I think if you've clearly communicated your vision and mission and your whole team are bought into that, that really shows when you're having your buyer conversations. I think that's something that comes across really well.
Got it. A few more questions, but this time perhaps it's more like a fire round. Short questions to short answers. What did you not miss once you sold your agency?
The treadmill feeling. Sometimes you are running, full gas just to stand still. There is always a treadmill aspect. Sometimes it's a slower jog, which can be quite pleasant, but other times you are, full gas to go nowhere, and that's certainly something that is that I don't miss.
If you had to build an agency today from scratch, let's say 10 people maximum, what would you focus on first?
I think, pre-agency, I would look at, is there a problem from a certain type of potential customer that is begging to be fixed or improved in terms of its how you solve it, efficiency, speed, whatever, by AI. And if I could find something that was just begging to be sorted out by AI, I would create that small 10-person business focused around solving that one challenge using AI. And the first thing I would look at, if I could identify that, because I think that would be tough to do, but the first thing I would look at is building out a proposition and position around solving that challenge with AI, and then go to all of those customers and say, we've got this thing that will make your lives easier, pay us some money and your life will be a breeze, which is a very overly simplistic way of looking at it, but I think you have to start somewhere.
It looks like we are going in the right direction then.
Yeah.
What's one myth about agency exits or an M&A that needs to die immediately?
I think I said that earlier, the 1 million 7-figure EBITDA myth and private equity. That's just not true.
Scale sounds sexy, but so does the sleep. How does the founder figure out what they really want from their business?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because I think everybody is different. Everyone is driven by different goals. But I mean, if I could offer some advice in working out, what your end goal is, it's probably speak to as many people as possible who have been there and done that. Most people that write content on LinkedIn have probably not been there and done the thing that you're thinking about doing, like an exit, for example. So I would just say, just DM them. Me, for example, I get DM'd regularly and have all kinds of just, off the record coffee conversations with founders who are using it as almost like a therapy session. But I think that, just seek other people that have had experience in what you're thinking about maybe doing, and just get their insight. I think that's, you can't overstate how valuable that is.
If you could fix one thing in the agency world overnight, what would it be?
Reduce this pressure that all founders seem to feel to play the LinkedIn game and post weekly. It's not healthy. I think there's so much content on LinkedIn which can make a founder feel they're just not doing enough and I must post more. I won't have any clients. The pipeline won't be full if I don't post. And I think that we've got ourselves into a really sticky situation with that and LinkedIn. I think that if that could go away, that would be quite a wonderful thing.
I affirm, because I used to feel like that as well for actually multiple years. And then just quite recently, actually, earlier this year, I kind of started easing into the fact that I don't need to post every single day. In fact, we'll also be building a content system on the back of it. But it's like, well, I feel like LinkedIn is becoming so commoditized. The feed is becoming so commoditized, And the way to stand out is to kind of rethink how I think about content. So I definitely agree with that. That feeling of pressure that I need to be doing what everyone else is doing is definitely been helpful to taking this pressure off. And the last one? What's your personal North Star these days? Freedom, impact, or something else, or maybe a mix of everything?
What is my North Star? I think, yeah, you mentioned freedom, right? Yeah, I think freedom's a good one, but freedom and variety, actually, I would say. So I think that really drives me. I think I'm in a really good place where I'm lucky to have a huge amount of variety in what I've kind of chosen to do in my next chapter. Love the connection of meeting humans in an AI forward world, which I'm lucky enough to get to do on a pretty much daily basis. So yeah, for freedom and variety, I think what's that cheesy phrase? Variety is the spice of life, and I think that's definitely something I live by. And yeah, freedom is a good one.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I've personally learned quite a lot from this conversation, and it made me also think about, I actually confirm some of the beliefs and some of the hypotheses that we're working on internally. So thank you so much, and yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Rome. It's been great to chat to you, and looking forward to seeing the resulting podcast. You're going to get your editor cap on now and make us both look way more intelligent than we actually are, I hope.